Yiradumurang Maji, Ray Johnston, Humanities, Wiradjuri Yinabaladu. Hello, friends. My name is Ray Johnston, and I'm a Wiradjuri woman. I was born and raised on Darug and Gundagara country, where I have responsibility to community and country. I'm also a STEM journalist and broadcaster, and I also report on the arts and how it intersects with science, particularly environmental science. So this event today is one that is very close to my heart. Now, the world's first scientists, technologists, engineers, artists, mathematicians are the First Nations people of this planet. And on this continent, they're from the world's oldest continuing cultures, despite all attempts to erase them. So it is a great honour for me to be working today from the land of the Gadigal, and I wish to pay my deepest respects to their elders past and present, and I want to extend that respect to all of my First Nations brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles, wherever you are in the world watching us here today. And I ask that you too watching acknowledge the people whose traditional lands that you are on. Now, to kick off today's event, I would like to introduce ARUP's Global Director of Sustainable Development, Jo Da Silva, to share her perspective on COP26 and the role of collaboration in rising to the climate challenge.
Hello, I'm Jo Da Silva, the Global Sustainable Development Leader at ARUP. Climate change affects all of us, and we're currently on a race to reach net zero emissions by 2050. The future of humanity depends on that, and we're seeing climate change affect us all, wherever we are. This year, we saw heat waves in Canada, flooding in Europe, bushfires in Australia. Communities are being devastated by the impacts of climate change, and we're looking for more and more ways in which we can stop climate change being an existential risk and it meaning something to all of us, so we take the action that's necessary. COP26 is really important. The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said we're at 1 minute to midnight. That's his way of stressing the urgency of the situation that we're in. COP is where all the countries in the world come together and review the progress that's been made on climate change and have the opportunity to make more commitments that will hopefully get us on a path to net zero. There's some very important decisions being made at COP. The hope is that governments globally will increase the commitments they've made and follow through with action. There are some side agreements around methane, around stopping coal-fired power stations that are also critically important. And the final one that's vital is that the countries live up to their commitments of pledging $100 billion to help the poorer countries in the world adapt to climate change, because it's those countries that on the whole are feeling the worst impacts. Collaboration is absolutely essential to the success of COP. We need all the governments in the world to join hands and make the reductions in carbon that are necessary to get us to net zero by 2050. And we need that action to take place now, not in 10 or 15 years' time. But there are other sorts of collaboration that really matter. And at ARUP, we talk about the importance of uncommon collaborations, joining hands with other organizations that perhaps we wouldn't normally engage with in our day-to-day work. With Polar Zero, we're joining hands with the British Antarctic Survey and Wayne Binty. And this is certainly an uncommon collaboration between science and art and engineering to produce something that is a surprise, that's different, that reaches an audience that the three organizations individually would never reach. The science of climate change can seem overwhelming. It's very detailed and incomprehensible to many people. But art can cut through all that noise, and it can appeal to people emotionally and help us to understand what climate change really means by telling stories. I'm particularly excited about the Polar Zero exhibition because of the way that it bridges science and the hard facts, the reality of what climate change really means, and the pace at which the polar ice cap is melting, with something that is beautiful and emotive and doesn't appeal to our minds first and foremost, but really hits us in the heart. And so we can feel what's happening in the world around us. Amidst all the talk that is going on at COP, Polar Zero stands out as something that is completely unique and provocative. It challenges us to think about what's happened over the last 250 years and the impact of that accumulated human activity on the health of our planet and the future of mankind. And to ask ourselves, what action do we really need to take now to change the really very dire situation that we're in? I believe that over the next decade, it's still possible to put us on a trajectory that ensures that we won't get to catastrophic climate change. But it's going to require everyone to play a role.
It's becoming really clear that we can only rise to the challenges of climate change by working together. And during COP26, the UN is calling us to turn our ambitions into action by accelerating collaboration. Polar Zero, which Joe described, is taking place now at COP26 in Glasgow. The exhibition was selected as a centrepiece in the Green Zone at the conference. It's a story of art, engineering, and science collaborating to help accelerate climate action. And here to speak about the project is artist and PhD candidate at the Royal College of Art, Wayne Beniti, Director and Materials Specialist at Arup, Graham Dodd, and glaciologist at the British Antarctic Survey, Robert Mulvaney. Welcome, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Good evening.
Now, we are going to be watching a video which will be playing with some elements from the project. But Wayne, I wanted you to talk me through a little bit of this. What was the vision for this exhibition?
Well, we thought we'd bring three pieces to Glasgow, and we really wanted to explore this idea of touch and what it means to be in touch with the earth. So we've brought three pieces. The first piece is 1765, which is a glass sculpture, and it is encased with a volume of air from 1765. We've got a slice of ice core, which is called ice core, which is brought back from Antarctica by Robert. And we also have a piece called Ice Stories, which is a series of lived anecdotes and experiences from climate scientists around the world.
And Robert, tell me about the role that you played in Polar Zero.
So I spent my career drilling ice cores in Antarctica. So ice cores are cylinders of ice that we drill from the surface right down to the bed of the ice sheet, many hundreds or even thousands of meters down in the ice sheet. Now these, we bring them back to the laboratory. By analysing the ice and the air that's enclosed in the ice, we can understand how the climate and atmosphere has changed over many thousands of years. And I spend my time talking about climate change to people, and I tend to show them data, I show them graphs, but I find I don't really have that emotional engagement that I'm really after. So what I've always found is that if I offer somebody a piece of ice from Antarctica, some old ice, and let them hold it and let it melt in their hands, there's suddenly an emotional engagement with what I'm trying to tell them. They can feel the ice from Antarctica. They're thrilled that they're holding something that's been frozen for many thousands of years and it's melting away, and they can listen to it. They can listen to the air being released from the ice. It pops and crackles like milk poured into Rice Krispies, if that works in Australia. But they can hear it and they can feel it happening in their hands, and you just get that engagement, and suddenly they care a lot more about what I'm trying to tell them. So suddenly I can open up and tell them about climate change and the atmospheric change over thousands of years, and they're really interested in listening to it. So I think that's what we're trying to do here with this artistic way of showing data from Antarctica. We've brought some ice along. It's ice that I collected 30 years ago. It's been frozen in the laboratory ever since then. It's melting away. They can touch it, they can feel it, and then they can look at the air that we've extracted from the ice. So there's some air from 1765. They can look at it, and they can think about what that means to climate change in the atmosphere today.
It's incredible. I was going to say the graphs sound exciting enough to me, but I think this exhibition makes it even more exciting, I must admit. Now, Graham, there was a lot of problem solving involved to get Polar Zero happening. What challenges did you have to overcome?
Well, to provide this experience that enables people to engage, we wanted to engage everybody's, all the senses. And the first thing we noted is that in the room, it's an egg-shaped room, so you can hear the shape of the room. It echoed a little bit, and so the walls are draped and the floor is carpeted to damp that down so that you're immersed in the space. There's a sound system that plays a composition that Wayne made with sounds of air escaping from ice, so that starts to get you into that sort of a connection with the ice. And then Robert's core of ice, we wanted it to melt slowly and for people to be able to touch it and see it and feel it, but not for it all to melt away rapidly. And we didn't want to refrigerate the ice or the space. So it sits vertically. The top end of the core is insulated so it doesn't warm up too fast, and it's lit from below so that the heat from the lamp, it doesn't melt the ice too fast, and the light comes up through a glass bowl, and as the ice melts, the meltwater accumulates in the bowl, and as the light comes through it, the drips cause ripples, and so you get a movement of light to engage all the senses. And the challenge really was to make the ice the focus of attention on that piece, and then to make the air the focus of attention in 1765. And there,
Amazing.
how do you represent air? It really, you only see it when it's a bubble in something else. So it's a bubble inside the glass.
That's incredible. So, Wayne, this seems like a very different kind of exhibition for an artist to work on. Is that your experience?
For sure. I mean, one of the privileges is being able to be ambitious and have the certainty that what you're delivering has some facts and has some basis, and to be slightly give yourself the freedom to explore something you wouldn't conventionally be able to do as an artist. And so when we initially discussed the idea of bringing one of the pieces back, I think it was considered slightly, courageous and these sort of things. But I think actually we took the risk, and I'm glad we actually pushed ourselves to our upper limits. And actually, I think that there aren't many artists that have that support, that infrastructure to be able to say to make a plan, to bring a conversation to COP in the way that we have. So I'm glad we took the risk, and I think that we've added to the conversation in ways that people haven't been able to do so far.
Graham, I would love to hear more about this air that is within this bubble. What makes it unique, and how have you shown that to the people experiencing this exhibition?
Well, what makes it unique is that it's a scientific sample of air, and in a moment I'll ask Robert to explain why how he got that sample. But as an engineer, the challenge was how do we take that scientific sample of air and encase it in the glass? We've all seen bubbles in pieces of blown glass, in paperweights and things, and that's the air in there. In those bubbles is the breath of the glass blower, and we didn't want the breath of the glass blower in there. We wanted the scientific sample. So in the end, we cast the glass with a cylindrical hole from the bottom, and then filled that hole with a clear fluid that's got a high refractive index. It's dense fluid. So the refractive index helps it match the glass. So you can barely see that cylinder inside. And then it's sealed with a clear silicone at the bottom. And then Robert could inject with a hypodermic the air through that seal and into the fluid. And it sits in that cylindrical bubble like a combustion chamber in the middle of the glass block. And so, Robert, you extracted the air. You should explain what's unique about it.
So let's just go back a moment and think about the atmosphere evolving over many, many thousands of years and then get to 1765. So the deepest ice core I've ever worked on was 3,200 meters down into the ice sheet. It was a big European project. It took us 7 consecutive summer seasons in Antarctica to drill from the surface down to 3,200 meters. And that, when we brought it back to the lab, we found we'd got a record of ice from 800,000 years. Now, in that 800,000 years, the Earth has gone into and out of an ice age 8 times. So 8 times we've been in an ice age, 8 times we've been in a warm period like today. And all through that time, the level of carbon dioxide in an ice age is 180 parts per million, 180 molecules of carbon dioxide in every million molecules of air. In every warm period, it reaches about 280 parts per million. Now, if you look at the last 10,000 years, the relatively warm period we've been living in right up to the Industrial Revolution, that level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere remained at 280 parts per million. You arrive at 1765, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and it's still 280 parts per million. But fast forward to the day I was born, it had already risen by then to 315 parts per million. And in my lifetime, it's risen from 315 to 415. So we've gone from 280 pre-industrial right up to 415 parts per million today. So the air that we've put into the glass piece is the last air before man started to pollute the planet by burning fossil fuels and adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and starting to drive climate change. And that's what's so special about this little tiny sample of air. It's the last remaining air from the pre-industrial period. And it's very rare for people to be able to, it's obviously almost impossible for people to be able to experience that without they take ice from Antarctica.
It's incredible. If only there was a way to replicate it. We could just put that air everywhere. Robert, while I've got you, there is an urgent message about the impacts of climate change that you see in the raw science every day. And that needs to be communicated to a wider audience. What is it that you're seeing, and what is it like to see that science presented in a completely new way through this project?
Yeah, well, I think I've already tried to give you that message that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is rising very, very rapidly. But that's if you like, that's the glass piece we've got on display, and that's with that encapsulated old air in it. But the response to the rising carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is climate warms. It's a greenhouse gas. It traps outgoing radiation from the Earth's surface and causes the climate to warm. So what we're expecting to see over the next 100 years is the climate will warm and will continue to warm, maybe by 1.5 to 2 degrees, maybe even a little more if we're not able to achieve net zero. And the point that will have for me is that the response to the warming of the climate is the polar regions will start to melt at an even greater rate. And that kind of like reflects back in the ice core that we've got on in the installation, in the art installation. It's busy melting away. You can see the drips dripping off the ice, and this is like time ticking away, time where we're running out of time really to achieve polar zero and to mitigate climate change over the next century. And I see it in that, the response of the polar ice sheets, the melting of the polar ice sheets, increasing sea level rise. Really, we need to avoid all of that and achieve achieve net zero. And that's that's the goal of COP26 here in Glasgow now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Graham. Now I'm going to turn to our panelists here in Sydney. So I would like to introduce you all to Catherine Poltz, the Science Curator at the Museum of Applied Arts and Science, Chris Mercer, the New South Wales Arts and Culture Lead at Arup. Welcome. Hi. So, Catherine, tell me about the 100 Climate Conversations project that you're working on. What does it involve?
Yeah, so 100 Climate Conversations is the new exhibition and climate change project at the Powerhouse, opening in February. It's quite a different approach than we usually take at the Powerhouse in our exhibitions. And also, I should mention, for those who might not be familiar with the Powerhouse, we are Australia's leading science, technology, and design museum. We have a collection spanning 500,000 objects. And looking at, we talked a little bit about industrialization. The Industrial Revolution is an area that the museum really actively collects in, including the 1785 Whitbread Brewery, Bolton and Watt steam engine, and of course, James Watt, amazing inventor from Scotland, in speaking to that beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The museum is also in a former coal power station that used to feed electricity to the Sydney tram network, and our exhibition is actually within the boiler hall of that power station. So for us and the museum doing this project, thinking about how we think about innovation, looking from the 19th through to the 21st century, and the industrial to what we hope is the climate net zero revolution, is really interesting context. The exhibition is looking at profiling 100 climate leaders in Australia, and it will unfold through conversations with journalists and climate leaders. And we're really focusing on profiling people who are doing projects looking at climate solutions that exist today. And climate change impacts so many different areas of our work and our life, and accordingly, the solutions come from so many different areas. So we're speaking to people working in agriculture, in energy, traditional knowledge and cultural practice, architecture and the built environment, everything through to fashion. And we are speaking with them about what are the real case studies and work that they're doing on the ground today. So people that are implementing traditional cultural burning practices to prevent catastrophic fires like we've experienced in Australia, farmers that are looking to store and sequester more carbon in their soils, entrepreneurs who are building some of the largest renewable energy projects, and we'll be recording those stories. The project has a few different elements and way people can engage with it. We'll be having weekly conversations in the museum space, and we invite everyone to join us for those once we start. We think it's really important to connect audiences to the people doing the work. We will have also the recorded conversations will be released as a podcast. There's the exhibition space where people can actually hear the conversations and explore the archive of conversations. And looking at that concept of a time capsule being a museum, the conversations will also become part of the museum collection. And we encourage people to look back at them, certainly what is a historic moment and what we hope is a pivotal moment.
Absolutely. And I can imagine that people looking for ideas for solutions for climate change, they'll have the opportunity to see what people in a whole range of industries and from a whole range of backgrounds are doing.
Yeah, and that's something that we've been really interested in. The project has a unique solutions focus. In Australia, we're really familiar and have experienced those direct impacts. Sea level rise in the Torres Strait, the catastrophic fires, ocean heat waves on the reef. And we know thinking about climate change can be really overwhelming. And for me, working on this project, working with these leaders, looking at the solutions has been the most amazing antidote to that distress you feel when it is so overwhelming. And what we're trying to do with our approach is really connect people to the people doing this work and their inspiring stories. Robert was talking about touching the ice, and that's like in our own way what we're trying to do to make that direct connection, to hear about what the solutions look like, to hear from people talking about sequestering carbon, building these renewable projects directly, and I think there's something that's really profound about making that direct connection and starting those conversations between audiences and the people leading this revolution.
Sounds really powerful and practical, but also beautiful in a way.
Yeah.
Which takes me to arts again. And Chris, what role do the arts play in STEM, or should I say STEAM, particularly when it comes to action around climate change?
I think we're a huge advocate of STEAM. The arts is really coming into focus to provide the creative and divergent thinking, which is going to be required to solve our most wicked problems. And I think a collaborative STEAM approach is really going to lay the foundation for us to tackle climate change. I think Joe and Graham spoke to it quite well, that as humans, we're narrative creatures, and that our artists are our storytellers, and storytelling helps us unpack these really complicated, difficult challenges and engage with them emotionally. But I think what we see with our artists and the sector broadly is it also has our trust. And in this world of huge volumes of information and perhaps not enough wisdom or knowledge, our artists, in collaboration with our scientists and our engineers, can help us connect those dots.
Absolutely. And, when you're looking at things like traditional Indigenous knowledge, that science that has been developed over tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, depending on who you ask, that is passed down by the arts.
Yeah.
So, the arts are an integral part of STEM, and I will gladly argue with anyone who thinks otherwise. So, Wayne, heading back over to you, as an artist, do you see that collaborating with scientists and other parties can help turn ideas into solutions for climate change?
Well, I would use the word mediation, really. I mean, what I think we're doing, I think the three of us have developed a conversation, which is you could perhaps describe it more accurately as a mediation between art, science, and technology. And I think they equally inform each other. And one of the difficulties I think we're facing with is the distance that we have with ideas of the Arctic or Antarctic, and their consequence on our decisions that we take moving forward with the planet. And I think what we've managed to achieve is quite a balanced conversation. If you think of the geographical distance, the political distance, the physical distance, the intellectual, emotional, ethical, there are all these distances or polarities. In the room, we have a piece that's disappearing, but we also have an equal balance with a piece that's permanent. So I like to think that people are invited to mediate a conversation rather than asking for people to make decisions about finite solutions. I think what we're offering is a form of conversation where people can bring their own cultural associations to the work. And I think that's it's much more powerful to see what, and we've been in the space where people that, for example, there's a chap from Canada last week who came in and he said he thought he knew everything about ice. And actually, it was nice for him to discover in the space that there were other things. But I don't think that conversation would have been able to be mediated without the assurance that Robert had provided and the skills and insight. And often, one assumes that the conversation is going in one direction, but I know for a fact that Robert had reminded me of some of my initial ideas that I got lost on in the process. And equally, Graham, and we've worked together to form what I would describe as a form of mediation. I mean, Robert would probably have other things to say about that, but I'd like to think that we pushed each other to places that we wouldn't have arrived at conventionally.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wayne. Chris, what's your experience been like collaborating with the arts? I'd love to hear some of the examples of that collaboration, particularly to take action on climate change.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've had the opportunity to work with some extraordinary people, Jasmine Millett and her team at Screen Auckland, to help the Aotearoa New Zealand screen sector develop a vision and a roadmap towards sustainable practices. And that's underpinned with an emissions calculation, identifying the key hotspots. I think our work typically with any arts organisation is to work with them to understand their mission, their values in the context of a climate crisis, and understand their unique drivers, but also the expectations of the communities they serve. And when we start to have this conversation, we're able to then identify their high impact areas, what's within their sphere of influence. And that gives us an opportunity then to meaningfully develop a strategy and a pathway to reduce our emissions and our environmental impact.
I'm really genuinely loving hearing all of this, just hearing all of these practical steps that people can take to collaborate with industries that have been seen as not as practical historically.
I think there really is a huge opportunity for the sector to be the bastions of sustainability. That's, in their building performance, their operations, the way the work is made, to really be exemplars of sustainable and circular economy principles.
Fantastic. Now that's all we have time for from our panelists today. Thank you all so much for joining us from across the world and here with me in the studio today. Now I would like to introduce Karen Coker, ARUP's Australasia co-chair, to give some words of thanks.
Thank you, Ray, and look, thank you to everyone for joining us here tonight or this morning, depending on where you're coming from. So I'm Karen Coker, co-chair of the Australasia region here at ARUP. And look, it's been absolutely fantastic and such a pleasure to join the conversation here tonight. A huge thank you to the speakers, but to also all of you for joining us for this really interesting conversation. This conversation about cross-industry collaboration and the important conversation that we all need to have and how we can bring everyone to the table. Today marks Science and Innovation Day at COP26. And this discussion shows that science really is essential for understanding climate change and delivering the solutions we need. But I think the conversation tonight has also shown that arts can really offer an accessible platform to bring everyone to the conversation that we need to have. And that also collaboration is a word that we've heard much of tonight, and it really is only through collaboration that we're going to solve the challenges that we face. So the story of Polar Zero and the work of the Museum of Arts and Applied Sciences has been doing through the 100 climate stories and conversations are really powerful examples of how we can create change as we collaborate, and that phrase of uncommon collaboration that Joe used earlier. These examples just show how art can really make science and engineering more accessible. And we've heard about the emotions that, can be delivered through that storytelling. And actually the other thing is that idea of hope that storytelling can really bring to us. At ARUP, we always do strive to work collaboratively, and we love engaging with partners, outside our industry, and this idea of uncommon collaboration. So look, I challenge all of you listening and joining us this evening to just think about who you can partner with and how can you engage outside your normal industry and outside of your normal partners, because it really is going to be through that collaboration and those new approaches and new ideas that we're going to deliver the innovation and the action that we really need. So, I think probably my last point is, we do need to engage with everyone. And I think that the journey that we need to make, the transition we need to make really must be just and fair, and everyone needs to come on that journey. So look, huge thank you to everyone this evening. Thank you to our speakers, both here and in Glasgow. Thank you to the Polar Zero team. Thank you to Catherine and Chris here with me. And thank you very much for facilitating a great conversation this evening, Ray.
No problems. And thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. That does bring our event this evening or this morning, if you're on the other side of the world, to a close. I do encourage you to check out the Polar Zero on the ARUP website, and also 100 Climate Conversations when it launches, and start a conversation about climate change in your organisation, because we all have a role to play in making our climate commitments real. So I ask you, how will you and your organisation step outside the norm and work with others to rise to the climate challenge? Clients, please reach out to Chris Mercer in Australasia or contact us after the event to make contact with your local arts and culture lead to learn more about how Arup collaborates with the arts and the culture industry as well to deliver innovative and sustainable solutions. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day or your evening. My name is Ray Johnston. I've been your host this evening. Thank you very much.